Well, good morning, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Monday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. This is episode 843. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. It is July 17th in the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we're a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. And it's a nice sunny day. It was a really nice weekend. Everything seemed to be working well as far as the weather. It was a little rainy on Saturday morning. Of course, this isn't poor little me. I'm just letting you know that I just couldn't enjoy the whole weekend. And I'm still suffering a little bit today. I had a flare up last week starting Thursday, and it's starting to taper off, but I'm still having kind of a rough day today. This afternoon we're going into the Y, and I'm going to get signed up in there for some water classes. That will be part of my therapy with everything that's going on, and hopefully that'll help take care of some of the pain. And because I've been reading and doing some more studying on it, the more exercise I can get, because there's days, even other folks that suffer from fibromyalgia will tell you, there's days you just can't do it because they hurt so much, but the days they can, they seem to feel better, and they seem to feel better longer. So I'm hoping that we can get some type of relief, at least through some water therapy and some other low impact. I used to love lifting weights. I don't know if I could do that, but like walking, they have an indoor track at the Y, and there's a lot of times I can't, because of weather, you can't walk outside. It's either way too hot or it's raining or something like that. So they have the facilities there at the Y, so we're going in this afternoon to get me signed up on that. Last week was a pretty exciting week. With the net neutrality and everything that was going on there, I was still doing some research over the weekend on net neutrality. And folks, I'm telling you, if you want, let me rephrase this. Let me back this up. If you know about running a business and running it profitably, and you know anything about Austrian or Chicago economics, where it's not government driven, it's individual and businesses and that all together, signing contracts with each other. There is a huge disconnect in the online world, especially with this younger generation. They take things for granted. Now, and my buddy Dave can attest to this. Look, I was born in 1962. I just turned 55, and I'm not a stranger to the internet or computers, electronics. My main computer, my son and I, he mainly guided me. I did most of the work. I built my main computer. The other two, my production computer, my streaming computer, are Dells that I bought very cheaply off of eBay that work. They got i5 Intel processors. They work great. And so I know a little bit about technology. I'm not a technology guru. I do not live my life on the internet like some folks do. I remember the days, and I was there, and we talked about this before, on the Hunley. When somebody, and as a petty officer, I had to, when I was on duty, sometimes I got picked to be in charge of some guys that were doing extra duty because they were bad boys. And one of the extra duties they gave me, cut more than once to supervise while I was on duty on the ship, was punch cards down on the Unix system. They had, and they were transferring all these punch cards over to electronic tape when we got over. I don't know if they were doing it before we got to Scotland, but they were definitely doing it while I was in Scotland, because it wasn't soon after we got there well, not soon after I got there, but when I became a petty officer, not too long after we got in Scotland, a third-class petty officer, I would help out on taking, the Master at Arms doing the extra duties, and these guys were taking punch cards, manually putting them in a slot, and the machine would run them through, and then the data, depending on the punches, would be put over on magnetic tape, and they were getting rid of the Unix punch card system, but they had oodles punch cards on board, and it was mainly for supply. And a lot of this had to do with computer systems, had to do with supplies and logistics on the ship. Later on, they'll, like today, they're in all aspects of the ship: navigation, weapons systems, fire. The whole nine. The whole ship is wired, as it were. But I grew up in the day when all we had was punch cards, and they were switching over to magnetic tapes, which these we called them Trash 80s. Texas Instrument, and I don't know the exact nomenclatures, but they're 80s, and they were Trash 80s. They're little 10-inch or 12-inch screen at the most, and it was a black screen with green type on it. There was no graphics at all. Those machines were hooked up to the tapes, and then they could find the things on there. Like I said, most of this had to do with supply. And when I got out of the Navy and I dabbled a little bit in computers and writing code when I was back in Ironton, but I wasn't really interested in doing that. But that was back in the day when all we had was DOS and everything was command code. Okay, and there's a lot of folks out there that are programmers that know what I'm talking about with command code. Now I'm not good with command code today. I don't do it that much at all. And a lot of times when I do command code, I copy and paste. So I started driving truck, had some other jobs. I drove truck for almost 15 years. But when part of that time in 1995, I became severely diabetic. To the point when they discovered I was diabetic, my blood sugar levels were 750. And they're supposed to be average. It's supposed to be about anywhere from 90 to 120, 130. I was way up there. I was almost comatose. And so I had to actually come off the road for about a year to get my diabetes under control. And in that time, in that year, 1995, my brother-in-law he's an electronic engineer, works on MRIs and CAT scans and stuff. I asked him if he could start teaching me about computers, not about programming, but about the mechanical part, putting them together. And he did help me with, navigation and stuff like that. So my first operating system was Windows 95. My actual first operating system was Windows 95 on a machine that doesn't even compare to computing power to my smartphone today. Hardly no memory, no hard drive. I had a hard drive, but it wasn't a whole lot. And so there was a lot of things that I learned through that. But the folks today, some of these people commenting, these young folks, and I do call them young folks because they're sometimes 20, 30 years younger than me, they're commenting on net neutrality, that want net neutrality. They don't understand where we came from. They don't understand where the internet actually come from, because they came in, and by the time this last generation and the millennial generation were born, the internet was up and running and growing by leaps and bounds, and there were no rules. There were, as far as any government oversight over the internet, it was almost laissez-faire capitalism, as close as you could get to laissez-faire capitalism as you could get. And yet, all these things that they say are going to happen if we get rid of net neutrality never materialized before. Now, this one gentleman that I was watching, I'll try and remember to put his link up in the show notes page. I was watching him on YouTube, younger guy. I made a comment to my wife. I said, look, if you're going to go on camera, at least you should get out of your PJ bottoms or move the camera where you can't see the PJ bottoms. He had a decent shirt on like I have today, but he had PJ bottoms with a hole in the leg that he was showing on camera. Now, he has a lot of followers, so to me it matters a little bit. I guess so the younger generation doesn't matter how they look. He looked like a bum in clothes, but he was coming from the standpoint of the internet already being in place. That, and I'm not saying I had a hand in building it, but if it wasn't for folks like me that were interested in it early on, it would have taken a lot longer for the internet to get to where it is today. I saw the potential of the internet back when, now in the Navy, I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it was the military. The military actually developed the internet for military use as far as communications, but they didn't do anything with it. They just had simple communications with it. And it wasn't until some folks in the late 50s, early 60s started looking at some other applications for that other than military, and then later on, you know, in the 80s and 90s, it was really starting to be developed as something that could be used other than just messaging. And I used to be able to talk to a guy texting in South Carolina where we got a lot of our parts on these trash-80 computers, but it was just a simple, like I said, green screen. I typed to him, punch it in, you know, a couple of minutes later, I'd get a reply back. And the thing was, he was sitting right at his terminal waiting for the message to come in. That's how slow things were from Scotland to South Carolina. But we've advanced so far. And a lot of these young folks, the millennial generation and maybe the one before them, were just being born. You know, maybe 2 generations back, were just being born. You know, there's a lot of folks on YouTube today that were born in the late 90s, you know, in the mid to late 90s and on. And the internet from 1995 on, that's where I pin the expansion of the internet. From 1995 on, when Windows brought out Windows 95 and the PC, not the PC was born before that, but Windows 95 made it accessible to everybody. Libraries had them a lot before people did. And or for families did. And like I said, I saw the potential for, you know, and I still see greater potential for the internet. But my point in saying all this is we never ever would have got here if net neutrality was in place way back in the 90s. We would have never got here. And the thing that these folks, they do not recognize, and this is because they've been raised up these past couple, I would, like I said, I'd say individuals that were born after 1995, because I'm going to pin that to the computers. Their schooling has been government schooling. That's been more indoctrination than education. They believe that the government is this harmless teddy bear out there that won't do any harm. They don't read in history. They don't go back and look in history and see what happens when governments take over and monopolize things, which was exactly. If net neutrality is allowed to stand, then the government will be able to come in and they'll start picking winners and losers, and they'll start telling people what they can and cannot watch, because they'll have one group over here saying, we don't like this and we're paying into your campaign to get you elected. What are you going to do about it? And that's exactly where it's going to go. And these younger folks, they don't realize that. They have a narrative that they're living by. Their whole life has been crafted into a narrative, and one of the things was about, you know, with net neutrality, and it's a very complicated subject, and I try to simplify it and just tell you, look, net neutrality is government control. No net neutrality is free markets. And so where do you want to be? And on Friday's show, we talked about I'd rather have free markets than freeloaders. And with net neutrality, you're going to have a lot of freeloaders. One of the things early on in this discussion was way back on when I was listening to Rush Limbaugh's show, and they blamed him and right-wing rhetoric for the Oklahoma bombing. And it was during Bill Clinton's era as president, and they were trying to clamp down on the radio stations. And the one thing that they brought up on the radio stations was, well, they have all these, and trust me when I tell you, folks, and it still does. Conservative talk radio dominates the AM dial. Conservative talk radio dominates blog talk radio as far as the amount of contributors to blog talk radio. And it's not the same with YouTube and some of these other platforms, although conservatives are on these platforms. But back in the day, you know, when you really didn't have smartphones and all this other access to MediaNet, conservatives absolutely ruled the AM band, and Rush Limbaugh was the leader of them. And they were trying to figure out ways to either shut Rush Limbaugh down or give the opposition equal time. And a lot of the liberals out there that were on radio and couldn't do anything, what was that one, Talk America, I think was one of the liberal ones that Al Gore was part of, that never got off the ground because the listenership just wasn't there. And quite honestly, and this is my personal beliefs, I think even liberals know when they hear hokum, when they hear something that isn't truthful. So again, they were trying to equalize the playing field. And that's exactly what net neutrality does, is it makes the field equal to everybody. And these guys are screaming to high heaven saying, you know, we paid for the bandwidth, you can't throttle things down. And the one argument that I shared with one guy, I don't know if he's going to get back to me. If he does, I'll share the link and tell you who he is and everything. But I said, how come you're protesting for net neutrality when you do not protest all the grocery stores for doing the same thing that you're accusing the internet of doing, which they haven't done, but the grocery stores have done it for years and years and years, and you're paying for it, and you don't scream to high heaven about that. And what that is with grocery stores is vendors that come in and put their wares, you know, their goods on the shelves. They'll pay a little extra for premium shelf space, you know, the average height of a human being, their eyes and everything. They'll pay for that premium on maybe one or two shelves to showcase their products. But in the end run, the consumer pays for that premium. But they also, that's a premium spot. They figured out through studies and everything that certain shelves in the store, when you're going down through the aisles, even in the frozen food section, everything, certain shelves at different heights are premium and they pay for it. And so these guys complain about, well, you know, I shouldn't have to pay extra to get my Netflix. And I'll be doing the video today. I finally did all my research, and it's shocking. They shouldn't have to pay extra to their ISP if they want to watch Netflix. Now, what's happening with some of the ISPs, they were talking about this, but nothing came about because other ISPs weren't going to do it. They were going to make fast lanes, and they may eventually make fast lanes. We don't know. And quite frankly, it doesn't bother me if an ISP wants to create a fast lane where they have you pay extra to have all these streaming services come in, because these streaming services take bandwidth. So if you have a certain amount of bandwidth and you're screaming to high heaven, I want new net neutrality because I don't want to be throttled down for any of these things, and the ISP says, look, we're getting too crowded in these bandwidths here, and other people doing other things on the net aren't able to do those things, we're going to create another tier where streaming will be up on this tier and just regular, you know, computer access, whatever, is going to be on this tier. And, you know, that could come about. We don't know. Competition will actually sort that out. But the throttling, one of the biggest stories they talk about, throttling on cell phones. And the thing is, they sign these contracts. I don't have a monthly contract. I have Boost Mobile. I pay by the month, and that's my contract. But I do, in that contract, I have an old Boost Mobile, not phone, but service that I've kept up over the years, where I have unlimited bandwidth on that. I went back and checked that, and I actually do. I have unlimited bandwidth on that, although once I get over a certain spot, it doesn't cost me anymore, but they will throttle me. And once I get, I think, over 10 gigabytes a month, okay, they're going to slow me down a little bit. Okay, but I'm not being charged anymore. I've checked into some other AT&T, Verizon, Sprint contracts. We have these two contracts. When you go over that, your limit, you not only get throttled, you get charged for that extra bandwidth over that. And that's what, and most of the arguments I saw, that's what they're complaining about. But my question back to them was, you signed a contract that said that. Why are you upset that they're doing it? Yeah, you paid for so much bandwidth for the month, and you go over that, you get throttled, and you get paid. You have to pay more. My contract says I go over that, I don't pay more, but I do get throttled. Oh, my ISP here at home, my local ISP, and this is another thing I want to get into before we really get down the show, because I want to finish up my thoughts for last week. My local ISP, I have different levels of bandwidth that I can buy. I bought a higher one. I don't have the highest residential one. I have the second highest residential one. And that's because I do a show. Eventually, Lord willing, the show expands, and you know we actually build out and everything. I'll end up having to go to a commercial account because I'll need the higher bandwidth, higher than residential accounts will actually afford me. But with my contract, and I've talked to my local ISP, Service Electric Cable, and I don't get throttled if I go over my limit for the month. But I do get charged for going over my limit for the month. And I've actually heard people comment about that, saying, well, it should be unlimited. Well, if everybody's is unlimited, then the internet's going to have to be so huge that it may not work properly. Now, eventually it might get to that point, but we're not at that point right now. And so, you know, I think the ISPs can set their rules. They own the equipment. They own the access to the internet. And if they're selling it to you and you sign a little contract and they put these rules out there, abide by the rules. Why do you need government to come in and smash those rules because you want more? This is like when my son and I, when he was still living at home, he would download free music off of these websites that were kind of questionable. And I got after him about that. I said, Kyle, I said, this isn't right. I said, you're stealing from the artists and you're stealing from the production companies or the record labels, as they used to be called. Probably, I think they still are called record labels. And I told him, I said, you're stealing from the folks. And you know what his response was? Well, these record executives, these recording executives out here are stealing and ripping off these artists. And so I'm not going to feed into that. So, and I said, okay, you're not going to feed into that, but you're still stealing from the artist because you're getting the music for free. Is that what you're telling me? And no matter what he did, he didn't have a good argument for that. You know, just because someone else is doing it wrong doesn't mean that you're allowed to do it wrong and get away with that. You're still stealing from the artist. And it's just like computer games. It's just like back in the day. I don't know if they can still do it today, but I remember, you know, from Windows 95 on, there was people out there that were selling hacked copies of Windows. You know, they were actually able to somehow figure out the kernel of it and steal it and then sell them for a very reduced price. Now that's stealing from Microsoft Windows. You know, but there was a lot of people trying to justify that. And I honestly, I don't know how you justify stealing. In my opinion, you can't justify stealing at all. So the last thing I want to say on this, most of the problems, and this is most of the problems, the big countrywide ISPs are not doing the throttling. They're not doing the blocking. They're not doing any of this stuff. And this is the secret. I don't know if it's a secret, but this is the thing that their research hasn't revealed to them. It's called the last mile. It's called the last mile of the internet. That's from the ISP to the house. Usually those internet providers in communities like Sunbury, we only have one as far as a cable. Now this is important to remember. As far as a cable provider, we only have one. It's Service Electric Cable Television. Okay? There are hotspots in the area that are run by, and I can't remember which ones or both, by let's just say both for the sake of argument, and I'll cover both of them, AT&T, Verizon, and maybe Sprint. They have actual internet hotspots that you can pay, put a special antenna up your house, and access the internet that way, now that you're bypassing the local ISP. So that's two ways. Third way is your cell phone. My cell phone, I can tether it and use that as a internet hotspot and go over my Boost mobile network to get now that's the third way. Fourth way, you can actually buy a satellite and get the internet through that way. Now it's expensive, but you can still do it. So there's a fourth way you can get locally onto the internet, and there's a fifth way coming, and I believe it's going to be nationwide, although Microsoft is actually working in rural areas. Eventually you're going to be able to get on ISPs over a special antenna that uses what they call the white noise band in television broadcasting. And I think this is going to revive some of the television broadcasters and give them a little extra income. But right there's another way you can get on the internet. Plus, there's we're like nodes only go 5 miles. Now maybe eventually for DSL, they'll actually be able to figure a way to go even further than that. But right now they only go 5 miles, and we're exactly in Snydertown, Pennsylvania. We're exactly 5 miles each way from Sunbury or Elysburg from the nearest node, so we can't get it. It's like not exactly, we're 6 miles away from each node. So we're 1 mile further than what they'll do to bring out DSL out to us. Not that I want it, but I'm just saying there's actually a sixth way that you can get on the internet. So all these folks that are out there whining and snotting about keeping net neutrality and about how bad these ISPs are and how bad they're going to be without net neutrality, if they were on the internet before June 12, 2015, they were operating under an internet that did not have net neutrality, and none of these things happened. Now, there are a few things that happen locally. They were adjudicated, and when the wrongdoer, and I looked at all the situations, and the wrongdoer was actually punished or held accountable, and that was all without net neutrality. So if they could do that without net neutrality, why do we need another layer of government on top of the internet? I'm just saying, folks. I'm just saying. All right. Oh, man. The official drink of the Dan Clemens Show is Rocky Mountain High Brands. They are a hemp-infused drink. They have black tea. They have mango energy drink. They have mixed berry energy drink. They have put your lime in the coconut energy drink. And they also have a lemonade, which is what I drink because it doesn't have any caffeine in it. They have power drinks. They have bars that are infused with hemp. And they have a Spirit Eagle water that's pH balanced. It's actually an alkaline drink to help balance your body's pH. And these are the official drinks of the Dan Clemens Show. And full disclosure, I do have own stocks. Not a lot, just a small amount of stocks in them as part of my retirement portfolio. So, and matter of fact, like I said, I will be drinking my, as soon as I finish up my last bit of my coffee here. Let me turn my coffee heater off here. I should rig this up where I can bring that switch up underneath the desk right here in front of me. Anyway, so if you, these Rocky Mountain High Brands have 16-ounce drinks, have 100 milligrams of hemp oil in it, and trust me when I tell you, they do help with my fibromyalgia and the pain I experience. I was running out. I forgot to order them like I should have, and this time I'm gonna, my next week, my next wife's paycheck, I'll order another box of it because it comes clear from Texas, and it takes a while to get it from the warehouse over to the UPS and get it up here. And so I haven't been using it for the past couple of days, and I noticed my pain levels have gone way up. So it is helping me, and I know that's only, you know, my opinion on it, but I'm just telling you the truth of the matter as I see it, folks. Today's daily Bible reading comes from 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. Now, godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. Everything else is gravy, folks. You know, if we have a nice house, cars, and everything like that. I'm not saying God doesn't want us to have these things. I'm just saying if we have the basics, we should be content, and we shouldn't, you know, we shouldn't fuss and fight about. We should have more and more and more. If God blesses us with those things, that's fine. And I don't honestly. I think just God blesses folks with money and wealth that know what to do with it as far as giving back. And I'm talking about the church as far as being givers and taking care of things. Today's quote meal is from an unknown author. Anyone can count the seeds in an apple. I love this one, folks. But only God can count the apples in a seed. Think about that. Think about that. Today's Bible lesson is actually a sermon outlined by Tom Moore. And you can find this over at gewatkins.net. And it's a sermon on Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 through 20. Jesus' mission and the Old Testament. It's a good outline. And I use a lot of these outlines for actual Bible study, where I can go down through there and look up the verses and write notes and stuff like that. And I've actually used some of these outlines and pieced some of them together to make sermons that I actually preach from time to time at our local Church of Christ. So that'd be a good Bible lesson for you to go to over at the DanClemensShow.com. Show notes page, episode 843. Now, so I still have, there's a couple other articles in here that I'm not going to talk about. You can read about them. And basically it's just one. Net Neutrality Day of Action fizzles into big yawn. And this is by Chris W. Street. He posted this on the 12th of July over at Breitbart. And it basically was. It was a big yawn. The folks that were for net neutrality were claiming that, you know, our day of action produced 1.6 million responses on Wednesday, and they're actually claiming them all of themselves. And I know that one of those 1.6 million comments was mine, and mine was in the negative. Mine was in the negative. All right, there's a couple things going on here that I want to get to. One of them is resistance, or the resistance that cried wolf. Now, I thought this was a pretty interesting article because this is something that's happening more and more each day, and this is by W. James Antilli III over at theweek.com, and this is hat tip. I found this on the Drudge Report 2017. The resistance that cried wolf. It is impossible in some quarters to discuss Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with a shady Russian lawyer without being quizzed about similar bad things politicians from the opposing party have done. What about Ted Kennedy's secret messages? Now, we talked about this last week on Friday. To the Soviets while Reagan was running for re-election. What about the Ukrainian government trying to help Hillary Clinton? And on it goes. This bit of rhetorical judo has become so common in our politics that it even has a name. Whataboutism. I like it. Whataboutism, right? Naturally, its origins have been tracked back to the Russians, if not even further back. The economist Edward Luce described it in an attempt to match every Soviet crime with a real or imagined Western one. Okay? And this goes on. This goes on, folks. I thought this was an interesting article. No matter what you're talking about, there's always somebody out there saying they're not explaining their actions. What they do is try to deflect, and this whataboutism is actually a deflection. And so, well, what about what you guys did? Or what about what these people did? And you see where this article's going. And folks, this is... And I never thought about it this way, although I've actually called some things, like playground activity or playground attitude, or this is something we did on the playground when we got caught doing something. Well, so-and-so was doing this. Well, that doesn't take away from what you did wrong that you're actually being called on the carpet for. Yeah, maybe they didn't get caught for that, but you got caught. And the fact of the matter, somebody else did something wrong has nothing to do with what you did. And this is what's going on in our politics. And I've tried to explain this a little bit about Donald Trump Jr. What he did was foolish. What he did was had the appearance of impropriety, but there was no laws broken. As a matter of fact, I was reading an article this morning, and I'm not sure if it's in my show notes. I'll have to look in my show notes page. I want to finish this up here, where this may have been a setup with this Russian lawyer. This may have set up. And that's why, again, I hope that Donald Trump Jr. in the future learn from this and actually vets people that he's going to talk to. Actually get some opposition research of his own about who he's meeting with, especially when it comes to something high level like this. And this is something that not only the Democrats have been doing, but the Republicans, especially the Trump supporters, have absolutely been doing this. They never, the thing about whataboutism is they never try to defend their actions with actual, well, this is why we did this. The way they try to defend their actions, like I said, is they're pointing to somebody else and say, well, what about them? Well, what about them? What about this person? What about this situation? Always pointing outwards, but they never take responsibility for what they did. And this is a huge problem in politics today. I mean, it's huge, and the main problem with that in politics today is that we never actually get people that actually, how do I want to put this? They're actually honest with everybody. That actually has a little bit of moral intestinal fortitude to actually stand up and say, you know what, I was wrong, I did this, I apologize, please forgive me. Now, Donald Trump has done this on several occasions. And maybe this is my bias coming out of me, I could not, honestly, folks, when former President Barack Obama was speaking, I couldn't listen to it very long. Because of the facts and truth I knew to be facts and truth, researched, confirmed, and what he was actually saying were two totally different things. And this is a problem in America today that we, and I even entitled the show, Facts and Truth, Not Narrative, Should Drive Politics. And this is a huge problem in politics throughout the world, but I'm going to deal with American politics. This is a huge problem with American politics because politics has become such a money-making enterprise. It has. And folks, and this is, I've actually read, this was years ago, I've actually read some articles I thought were pretty good speaking to that we should limit how much congressmen can make. And it's mainly Congress. It's not so much the White House or the judiciary. It's mainly Congress who are being lobbied by these deep-pocketed lobbyists. That now, some lobbyists are with some citizens groups like the NRA and some other citizen groups out there, and other ones are for industries, and some are actually for foreign powers or foreign industries or foreign interests and stuff. And somehow this money, this lobbyist money, makes it into the pockets of these politicians by hook or by crook. And if we could limit that, somehow actually get rid of it, and these congressmen and congresswomen had to live on the salaries that we the people actually pay them, I think we would see the crook element, the criminal element in Congress actually go down, because there's no money to be made. There's actually no money to be made, and then we might get back to a day or in the future where we actually have citizen legislatures, where citizens go to Washington and follow the Constitution and judge things about following the Constitution, and actually govern with the rule of law. Right now, our governance of the United States, from D.C., is way outside the rule of law. When you talk about the Constitution, when you talk about these groups like Common Cause taking Donald Trump Jr. to court over laws that they stretch their meanings out so far that you can't even define them. Matter of fact, I was actually emailing Common Cause, and I wanted to see if they actually sent back any. Let me get up here. Let me see. Common Cause, automatic reply. Thank you for contacting. This is. It says, thank you for contacting Common Cause. Due to the volume of email we received, we're unable to respond to every email personally. However, if you have a particular question, please choose from the options below for assistance. So give me other emails that I can go on and talk about and email them, and I bet you, and I'm going to try this, I'll try this after the show, I bet you that I'm going to get an automatic response from them. Now, basically, real quick, I wanted, since I got into this already, I just wanted to, the first email I sent was in response to, let's see, they're talking about taking Common Cause versus Donald Trump Jr. to the FEC and DOJ. And my thing, what I stated to them was, I have been following the whole Russian collusion news from the very beginning, and you don't have a leg to stand on in this instance. Was Donald Trump Jr. foolish to do what he did? Yes. Does it have the appearance of impropriety? Yes. Does it break the law? Only if you stretch the law beyond its original meaning. And that's exactly what they're doing to try to entrap Donald Trump Jr. in that. And then they went on to talk about net neutrality over Common Cause. And they said, today is a historic moment in the fight to save net neutrality, because in our democracy, our access to information is essential to hold elected officials accountable. Common Cause activists across the country are participating in the nationwide day of action to save the free and open internet from Donald Trump's FCC. And again, now Common Cause, again, let me explain this. They're being funded by Open Society, which is a George Soros funded 501c. And very, very anti-freedom. And if you're for net neutrality, you're against freedom. I want to simplify it as much as I can. And my first off, I said I agree access to information is a First Amendment right, and in our republic it should be protected from government intrusion at all costs. Net neutrality is a government overregulation of an industry that doesn't need the heavy-handed government. That's why I fight against groups like yours that lie to the American public about net neutrality, what net neutrality really is. One more thing, just because you keep calling America a democracy doesn't change the fact that we are a republic as defined in our country's founding documents. And that's a push-button item for me, folks, that that these folks keep calling us a democracy when we're actually a republic. And some people say, well, that's a minor thing. It's not a minor thing. It really isn't. And you need to go and define your terms, what a democracy is and what a republic is. And I'm talking about a big D democracy. Now, is a republic a type of democracy, little d? Yes. But they try to conflate the two, little d and big D democracy. And I've yet to hear one of these anti-freedom groups call us a republic. Not one of them. And I think that's a concerted effort. And it's a fact and the truth that America is a republic. We're not a democracy. We're a representative republic. So I just wanted to go over that with that, what aboutism. I think that's pretty good. And Dave, I know you're on there and you're probably busy eating lunch and everything like that, stuffing your face with some good food. But just let me know how the volumes are there on YouTube. I finally got my last pieces in for my soundboard, and I got those on for my main outputs, and it looks like everything's working good. I just wanted to make sure that it's still working good. Okay, Carl Bernstein. Now this, you might remember him from way back when. He's an old-time reporter from, way back, the Nixon days. That's how far back he goes. Now this is an article by Daniel Chaitin over to Washington Examiner. He posted that today, and this is another hat tip to Drudge report. Carl Bernstein, cold civil war gripping U.S. as media embraces different facts. And I thought this was a very, very interesting take on this, because this is something we've been talking about a long time. We have the lamestream media putting out their talking points and their narratives, and because they've already come up with a conclusion, and the facts and the truth don't matter. And then you have the new Main Street media that's mainly on the internet that is counteracting this and fighting back against this with actual truth and facts of the different issues that come up on people's on their plates or in front of them each and every day. And so we have a sort of a civil war going on here for the hearts and minds of Americans. And on one side you have truth, facts, and objectivity, and then on the other side you have narratives and talking points and subjectivity. It's all subject to, or subjective to, or subject to the narrative, whatever that narrative might be. Trump's a bad guy, he's got to go. That's the narrative. All right, you guys run with that. You guys find me stories, make up stories, whatever you have to do to support that narrative. And if you find truth and facts, we don't want to hear them because it doesn't support the narrative. And I know that might be a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek about how the situation is, but if you really look at things, how they've shaped out, how they've actually shaken out today with the lamestream media, you can't, at least me, myself, and I can't come away with any other conclusion that is exactly how they're doing their news. And so there is this cold civil war going on with the news. Carl Bernstein depicted the continuous nature of politics as being in the middle of a cold civil war. As President Trump pushes back against what he calls fake news, and various news outlets are perceived as espousing different truths. Appearing on CNN's Reliable Sources on Sunday alongside Leonard Downey, former executive editor and vice president of the Washington Post, Bernstein compared the current media climate to that of the Watergate era. He stressed the importance of anonymous sources and said, quote, leaks which really are not leaks are instead mostly reporters trying very hard to get truthful information and put some context to the story. Now, Carl Bernstein's actually sort of supporting these anonymous sources. But the problem was, even back in Carl Bernstein's days, they could actually confirm some of the stuff that was going on. They're not even trying to confirm the stuff that's going on today. I read on. Trump has been subject to several damaging leaks during his presidency, which has been mired in several investigations looking into Russian interference in the 2016 election and possible collusion with his campaign, and is said to be cracking down on people in his administration leaking information to the press. Bernstein, best known for his investigative reporting for the Washington Post that shed light on the Watergate scandal leading to President Richard Nixon's resignation in 1974, heavily relied on anonymous sources to follow the story. The difference is, his anonymous sources actually led to evidence of malfeasance. These anonymous sources today, no matter how many people try to investigate them and try to find out where they actually lead, they lead nowhere. They actually lead nowhere. But they're still pushing this narrative. So there is a huge difference between Carl Bernstein's days during the Nixon and Watergate investigation and today. Bernstein said one of the biggest differences between Watergate now is that we are in the midst of a cold civil war in this country. He expanded on that idea, saying that there is a political and cultural civil war, and all of our reporting has taken place in the context of that cold civil war, and nothing quite like that existed at the time of Watergate. Part of the cold civil war, Bernstein added, can be pinned on the configuration of media, the configuration, of media with Fox News, with CNN being perceived by different sets of viewers as representing different truths. Singling out Fox News, he said, the right-leaning cable news channel has changed American politics as perhaps no other institution has. Not all of his critique focused solely on specific networks, but on the cable news in general, which he described as a hothouse of political debate in which fact-based debate is being impossible in this culture. He said this different media universe is partly to blame on reporting coming on the air to discuss their stories. And this, folks, he talks about here different truths. Now, I know that folks can see things from a different perspective. And we see that throughout the gospel account, especially with the empty tomb. There's a couple different accounts or descriptions of the accounts, and if you piece them all together, they're not contradicting each other. They're just that individual saw that empty tomb from this perspective with his own ideas in place, and this other person did the same thing from a different perspective. To get to the truth, you have to have facts. You have to actually see things from all perspectives that are being reported, and you have to sift through them to see which ones are factual and which ones are not, especially in our day and age with so much video evidence out there that you can come to the truth. Now, to say that there's different truths out there, to me, is kind of a cop-out. Because now Bernstein's time, now granted, back then you had to hustle to be a reporter and do your job. Today, it's a lot easier to be a reporter, and I think too easy sometimes, that some of these reporters don't even leave their office. And I think guys like Tim Pool, who is a libertarian, who's out there, he actually travels to these other countries and tries, especially some of these hot issues like Antifa and stuff like that. He travels and tries to do independent reporting on that, and tries, again, from his perspective, but he puts out his bias ahead of time, and he tries to give you as much facts and information as he can in order for you to make up your mind and make a decision about that. So there is, and this comes along with what Carl Bernstein says about this cold civil war and different truths and stuff like this, actually has roots in ethical humanism. And you hear me talk about that a lot on this show. You have skeptics out there, you have atheists, you have agnostics out there that are part of this humanistic movement in the world, but more particularly here in the United States, that their ethics are questionable, their morality is definitely questionable, and the way, especially their morality. Now it's kind of funny that their morality mirrors, some of their morality, not all of it, some of their morality actually mirrors biblical godly morality. But they say they didn't get that from God. They got that by reason and sounding things out. But the problem with that is if you don't have an absolute authority that tells you what morality is, and man is not the absolute authority in that, because if there, and I'm just putting a hypothetical out there, if there is no God, then morality is in the eyes of the beholder. Now, society can get together and say we don't like these activities, and that's fine if they say they don't like those activities, but they can't say they're immoral. Because who's to judge? Because if somebody else or another society comes along that differs from them and says, you call this immoral, we call it okay, and anybody that comes over here can practice whatever that is, and if they go over to this other society and try to practice it, they get in trouble. So you see where there's, to me, that's where the skeptic argument actually falls down. Because you could have a society that that believes that one day a year, and I'm going back to, I never watched these movies, so I don't like them type of movies, but The Purge. You have one day a year, you can go around and kill people. You can go around and murder people and not get in trouble for it. Just put that one day a year, and that's acceptable in our society. Other societies may say, no, that's not acceptable in our society. But you see what I'm saying? With their argument about society says what morality is, that you're on very, very shaky ground, because you don't have an absolute authority to say what morality is if you don't have God. Now, we do have God, and God says what absolute morality is, and that's what we need to follow. And so these when I hear these things about different truths, they're not different truths. Now, you can argue, well, they're seeing it from this perspective. Well, quit looking at just one perspective. If you're an actual journalist and a reporter, you need to look at it from all sides, from every angle that you can come to, and sift out what's the wheat and what's the chaff, get rid of the chaff, and report what the wheat is. I'm just looking at one of the comments in here. What Dave's saying. Can you imagine employing a democracy at home? Kids, do you want to go to Disneyland or have health insurance? Actually, and I've said this before on the show, never been taken to task before, but in my house, inside my four walls, we're not a republic, we're not a democracy. We are, or I am, a benevolent dictator. And that's what I am, inside my own castle, inside my own home. Now, that doesn't mean that I can violate rules of law as far as abusing my children, my wife, or anything like that. It just means that what I say goes. It's either my way or the highway. It's my castle, my domain. I'm a benevolent dictator. I allow you to live here. I feed and clothe you. I expect certain things out of you, a certain amount of respect and obedience. And that if I ask you to do chores, you're going to do them without grumbling too much. Things like that. I'm a benevolent dictator in my home. Thanks for pointing that out, David, about if we had democracies in our homes. Okay. Real quick here, got about 6 minutes. This is something, too, I was investigating and researching at the end of the week. Let America Vote has been really cranked up about the President's Commission on Voter Fraud. And they, let's see here, the Huffington Post, let me get over to it. They were talking about the White House. White House publishes contact information of people who wrote to it concerned about privacy. Oh, they released it, right? And they go on down through the article talking about this, these sensitive informations that they released. And I actually went over and found there's a PDF that's actually cited with that. I have the executive order over there. And I also have the, let's see here, voter privacy. Let me get over here. Okay, voter privacy. Do I have that note in here? I thought I copied. Maybe I couldn't copy it down. Let me go back up here. President's order. Basically, what it was, if you made a comment on the commission, if you made a comment on the commission, they actually put up there that saying that you know, be careful of the information you share, because we're going to, you know, because it's public comment, we're going to put it out to the public. And they didn't say anything about redacting it or anything. I know some people say, well, when they do public comments, they're supposed to go through and redact this stuff. But this little blurb that they talked about in there says we'll just share the raw data, the raw comments with folks. Now, I went through, it was there's a link to a PDF in here. And I went through and looked at everything, and I couldn't find. Matter of fact, I know I had this on Friday's show too. I couldn't find anything in there where other than maybe addresses were actually shared. And if you're foolish enough to read a note that says we will share these comments, and it doesn't say anything about redacting personal information, you better not share any personal information if you don't want it shared. And don't get mad at it later. And this is the whole thing with Let America Vote and what they're talking about with this presidential commission. Oh, in this Huffington Post article, oh, they let all this personal information out. Oh, how dare they do that? And yet they were warned The folks who made comments were warned. Matter of fact, when I went over to the FCC, I left my comments about net neutrality and saying we have to do away with it, and here's the reasons why. They actually put that warning too. Your comments are going to be part of public record, and if you don't want something shared, don't put it in there. And it's like people, they don't read anymore. They go and do. And then when something happens, like, well, how dare they? And it's like, well, how dare you? How dare you complain about something that you looked at and you should have read? If you didn't read, then it's shame on you, and you can't blame the government's commission. Matter of fact, this whole thing, I'm going to end the show up on this with this voter information. You keep hearing that they're asking for social security numbers and blah, 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 all down the line, all this personal information. If you read through the executive order, which I know most of these people haven't, they have to follow state law in the disclosure and the gathering of sensitive personal information. If the state doesn't allow certain piece of information to be disclosed, then the commission doesn't get it. Period. They said they have to follow state laws in this. So if your state law gives everybody everything, then it's not the commission's fault. It's the state you're living in's fault. And you need to get a hold of your politicians in your state and ask them, why are you allowing this, and have them change that law. This idea, and we talked about this a lot, about the federalizing of everything. You know, they on one hand, with I'll go back to net neutrality. They want the federal government to control things, but on the other hand, they want these big companies to protect their privacy against government intrusion. Well, which way do you want it? Do you want the government to control things, or do you what? You know, make up my mind, will you? So again, the lies that the anti-freedom groups out there put out every single day are exhausting. They are totally, totally exhausting. And that's where I'm going to wrap up the show. And I got a minute and a half. I just want to say a couple things here before. I want to say that at the end of the show, not at the beginning of the show, if you noticed you're watching on YouTube, there were no dropouts. What I did a lot of research on Friday evening, and I was using a Linux operating system on my streaming computer. And I did something when I put Linux on there. I left the partition that had all the Windows, the Dell Windows stuff in it, just in case. And I downloaded a couple programs that made it hook up to my home group on the Windows, and it just wasn't playing nice. And that's what was happening with it getting congested and not keeping up contact with my production computer and my streaming computer. So I have on a thumb drive, or had, and you can actually download the iOS for that. But long story short, which I made it too long already, I put Windows back on the streaming computer, and it seems like everything's working out fine. And I'm hoping everything's going to remain that way. So it's been the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your Constitutional War member. If you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, folks, and God bless. And we'll see you tomorrow at noon.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.